Welcome to Rooted in Our Ancestors' Dreams, the podcast where we explore the wisdom, resilience, and the dreams of those who came before us and how their legacy shapes our present and future. I'm Cara, and each week we'll dive into stories, traditions, and conversations that reconnect us with our roots, honors our ancestors, and help us plant seeds for a brighter tomorrow. This podcast is about more than storytelling. It's about reclaiming our narratives, reflecting on our journey, and rooting ourselves in the dreams that carried our people forward. So grab your tea, your journal, or just a moment of quiet as we take this journey together. Let's begin. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Lindsay Love, LCSW. She is located in Tempe, Arizona. Her practice is Therapy Loves, and her nonprofit is Girlfriend Culture. She is an EMDR consultant, and her focus is on oppression-based trauma, particularly Black women, and eating disorders. Today, she is going to discuss generational trauma and how it affects BIPOC people. So, Lindsay, thank you for being here. To start,
thank you for having me.
Thank you. To start, we're thrilled to have you, and I'm thrilled to talk to someone about decolonization in therapy and also about generational trauma. I don't think we have enough talks about that, and some people, even therapists, are unfamiliar with it. So to start with, what does Rooted in Our Ancestors' Dreams mean to you?
I think of Rooted in Our Ancestors' Dreams from not a perspective of excellence, but a perspective of rest and just being able to sit in our truth and find safety. I took a sabbatical last year for 3 months because I was challenged by another Black woman in my sister's circle. And I also was getting these messages from the environment, right? From other Black women that I had met. And one of the things that came about was that, I have all these credentials, I have all these letters behind my name, but our ancestors were rooted in work, not because necessarily they wanted to be, right? It's because they were forced to be and had their labor exploited for so long. So, the education and the letters and the practice and the nonprofit were great, but I didn't know how to rest. And in reading a lot of like Trisha Hersey and reading other Black feminist heroes like Bell Hooks, I decided that it was my ancestors' dream for me to rest and to dream as well, right? And so I think that I am rooted in my ancestors' dream when I am closing my eyes and taking 5 minutes to breathe and connect with them. And when I am walking and taking time to be rooted and connected to this earth. And I'm caring for this earth because she is an extension of me, right? She's an extension of us. Or when I get to travel and sit on a beach, right? Because those are things that our ancestors were not able to do. And it was intentional that our ancestors were not able to have the space to rest and to dream because our dreams are a threat to dominant culture. Because when you have Black people dreaming, we're going to dream up every liberation scenario there is and uproot existing power systems and focus on equity and liberation. And so when I am taking my PTO, don't have PTO these days, so I'm a practice owner. When I am taking my time off and I am resting, I do believe that I am rooted in my ancestors' dreams.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. In terms of generational trauma, how do you define generational trauma, and what are some ways you see it showing up in communities today, particularly those that are marginalized or what we call Black, Indigenous people?
Yeah.
immigrants.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like simply put for like the lay like person's understanding is that generational trauma is the baggage that we carry from generation to generation. And this could be behaviors, rules, beliefs, physical and emotional pain that just kind of like live through us from our ancestors. And I often, we talk about generational trauma, but I also, as an aside, want to really emphasize that it's not just the trauma that our ancestors are passing on to us too. Our ancestors have passed on some brilliant ways to survive these systems, right? That were designed to kill us, right? And so that baggage could be, when we unpack it, it could be trauma, but it also could be rituals, right? And beliefs, right? That also help us, right? But it also can be things that, were suited for surviving situations that our ancestors had to encounter that may not serve us today, right? And I think about Lucille Clifton. She has this poem called Come Celebrate With Me. And in the line, one of the lines in it is, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And I think that that line truly embodies generational trauma, and the survival strategies that kept our people alive, right?
Yes.
I see it in my clients and in my own family, right? Both of my parents grew up in Jim Crow, during school integration, feared for me and my sisters, right? Especially when we were in groups of white children because they knew that that was a real threat, right? Based off of things that they had experienced, right? And I think like today we see that same fear in how Black children are treated in schools or in the interactions that Black folks have with police. And it may show up in the talks that we give our children about survival or like in like the harsh reactions when like Black children talk back, right? It's a reflection of, our ancestors were not able or safe to speak up, to white folks, right? That once meant that they were either beaten, lynched, or arrested, right? And so
Absolutely.
what I see with my clients, especially Black women, is this fear of speaking up for themselves or having any emotion that is not, being happy or, being docile, right? Because there is a fear of being labeled an angry Black woman, right? And being labeled like not a team player in the workplace, right? And we know that even today that has dangerous consequences where you might suffer a job loss, right? And those things are very real today, right? We have over 300,000 Black women missing from the workforce, right?
Yeah.
And so our ancestors did give us the abilities to survive those situations. However, internally, when we're not speaking up, we're not taking care of ourselves, right? The evidence has shown that it does have drastic impacts on our physical and emotional health. And I believe there was a recent studies that said that, not speaking up and not being able to find a release is tied to some autoimmune disorders. And how many Black women do we know that are struggling with autoimmune disorders like lupus, right? And so that is how I think generational trauma shows up in my clients. And I think that generational trauma doesn't always feel like it's ours, but we are the keepers of it. And we've inherited not just like the wounds, but we've also inherited the survival maps of our ancestors that have carried them to keep us alive to this day.
And on the back of that question, you also, in line with that question, you also discuss survival methods. So what role can therapy play in breaking cycles of drama that are passed down from within families and communities.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to underscore that, you have to find the right therapist who does believe in systemic oppression, right? And does, see that, there are impacts and that they are very real and rooted. Because we do have a lot of therapists who do not believe that and want to play devil's advocate, right? With BIPOC clients, when we're talking about experiences that we've had or systemic oppression, and they tend to gloss over that or challenge us or use some kind of method like CBT, right, to challenge our beliefs about the world around us. But if you live in a community that is experiencing police violence or where ICE could potentially knock at your door, the belief that the world is not safe is actually a valid one and not an irrational one that needs to be changed, right? And so I think it's important for you to have a therapist who truly gets it and is centered in some kind of like oppression-based trauma training or understanding, or, does believe in decolonizing mental health, right? But I think with the right therapist, therapy can hold up a mirror and challenge us to confront some of the things that, where we've learned certain behaviors, certain rules and certain beliefs around ourselves, right? Because we do tend to carry a lot of like negative beliefs around ourselves. And it can disrupt like old narratives with new information, allowing us to like tell new stories about who we are. Right. And I think for many Black adults, and I'm going to center Black adults because that's primarily who I work with. Right. There is this story that we're told that we were lazy. Right. And I think that we hear that too. I was just at a event yesterday speaking on this, and like how many of us, when we were in school and we come home and take the nap, your parents are like, "What are you taking a nap for?" Right? Like, you're not old enough to be tired. Oh, your only job is going to school, right? You need to get up here and work because you're lazy, right? And, I know that I heard that a lot growing up, but in adulthood, in working with a supportive therapist to help me to reject that narrative. And I realized that I wasn't lazy. I was overcommitted. I was burned out. I was tired, and I was carrying the weight of trying to outrun a story that was never mine, right? And that does come from that generational trauma where, like we said, Black people at rest are a threat to white people, right? Or to dominant cultures. And so we were never allowed to rest. And we were always told that, this narrative of, the lazy Black person, right? And so my therapist really helped me to see those generational ties. And she also helped me to see that I always deserved rest, regardless of productivity. And what I really lived was some undiagnosed ADHD and disorganization that had gone unaddressed because the narrative was I was just lazy, right? And I think that therapy can give you the language to see evidence that maybe, it's not that you're lazy. Maybe it's that you've never been or never had the opportunity to experience rest or see all the things that you're committed to. And for me, it was accepting that rest was my birthright and that I wasn't doing anything wrong. And that's something I work with a lot with Black women, is like the shame and discomfort around rest. And so, yeah, I definitely think that it can help like break some of these cycles, right? That result in not just, the fact that like I'm not getting rest, but on the deeper end, I'm not getting rest and I'm also doing damage to my heart, or I'm having migraines that are out of control because I'm constantly moving.
I am so glad like I had the opportunity to hear you say this, because it resonates with me as a therapist myself, but also as someone who, that saying, no rest for the weary. We do get that line. I see it a lot in Black women or women in general, they have the superwoman cape and they're just going, going, going. They have all these roles, the role as the, caretaker and, overachiever and have to be the best, have to discount these, stereotypes we have about Black people and women. So when you say this, it resonates because I always have 1,000 things going. And my own therapist told me, you just need to sit down somewhere. You're doing too much. Like, you're doing way too much. She's like, you're moving the goalpost. And every time I talk to you, the goalpost just gets further out. Like, it's a new experiment or a new thought or a new goal that you have. And when do you rest?
Yeah.
You're telling your clients to take off this cape, to sit down, to just breathe, but you're not doing it yourself.
Yeah. And I think our clients kind of know that, right? They know that about us, right? Like, they can see it. Like, we see each other, right? Our clients can call us out on that, like, real quick. Like, well, what do you do? And if you're like, it is very apparent, right? But I also think that is kind of the trap of like Black excellence, right? And that your worth is defined by how excellent you are, right? How much you're able to produce, right? What your outcomes are, how many letters you have behind your name, right? But, can you also be excellent in the fact that, like, I really took care of myself this week and prioritized time for me, right? I ate lunch today, right? Uninterrupted and wasn't working at my computer. I took a walk today. When I was on sabbatical, it was funny. I was in an Airbnb and I checked with my sister circle and I'm like, I think I'm doing this whole rest thing wrong. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, I just sat in this Airbnb in silence all day and did nothing. And they were like, like, that is actually resting. Let's talk about, like, why you feel that is wrong. Right. Like, and I was living up to this perspective of like, I always have to be shifting and doing something to be considered worthy, right? To be considered humane, to be noticed, to be considered excellent, right? And so
a lot of guilt in not doing anything.
Yeah, I really had to work on that and recognize like there is no wrong way of resting as long as it connects to like, is my autonomic nervous system, able to shift to where I'm not feeling constantly under threat, right? Is my heart rate going down, right? Like there is no wrong way of doing this stuff.
Right. So how do you think that intersection of identity and trauma kind of shaped the way generational trauma is experienced and healed?
I think that it has a lot to do with that, right? We have different messages that we give to women than we give to men, right? Whereas, and I don't know that we tell Black women that they could be more vulnerable, but what I do know is that Black men, and, not even just Black men, like, I think men of color, do struggle with being vulnerable and help seeking, behavior because what has been defined for them as masculinity and manhood is to be strong and that emotions are for the weak. Right. And to almost like, act as if they're not human, but machine. Right. And so when we definitely do this to, BIPOC men, right, where, a lot of it has been based on, you're strong, so much so to where, our ancestors were confronting this, stereotype of like Black men being superhuman and a threat and dangerous, and then dangerous to white women in particular. And they were getting lynched, right? That's the generational trauma that they carry, right? From that.
Yeah.
And so, we are seeing a lot of Black men who are shying away from therapy, but then we're also seeing Black men who are really hurting. And because like we've said, like, sexism and hypermasculinity is also dangerous to men. Right. And so we're seeing men who are suffering in silence with depression and men who are like dying by suicide. You know, people didn't know anything was wrong with them, right? Like I think about Twitch and the fact that like, you know, in every photo you saw of him, he was smiling, he was happy, right? You know, he was, you know, dancing, pretty jovial dude, right? But then, you know, we're shocked that, you know, he has killed himself and like people are, you know, sitting around and wondering like, why? What happened? We didn't see that coming, right? And so I do think that men do put on this mask because they're afraid of how society will judge them for, you know, showing any kind of vulnerability, right?
I
Whereas with
definitely
like,
agree.
yeah. Whereas with like, you know, Black women, right? We're also treated as inhumane, right? We can show certain emotions, right? But we can't show anger, right? And we do know that, you know, when we do cry, our tears are often ignored, right? And our tears do not receive the same acceptance as white women's tears, which are often weaponized against us, right? We can't be assertive because we're gonna hurt somebody's feelings, right? We can't be honest and speak our truth because people have a problem with that, right? And so, you know, there's definitely, you know, some intersections there. And I think too, when you're talking about like, you know, LGBTQ folks, it becomes even more complicated, right?
Yeah.
And I do think too, like there's this fear of, I think especially in communities of color about talking about like your sexuality, right? And, you know, especially for marginalized communities who have been hypersexualized, right? In a lot of ways, right? And so when somebody's talking about their sexuality, what do? We hypersexualize, right? And turn them into deviants, right? And I think that, you know, oppression doing what it does, we tend to push out our LGBTQ community. We also cannot have conversations about gender and gender fluidity. And that's met with violence, right? And that's why we see that our trans like brother and sisters are being murdered, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, especially like trans women of color, they're actively being targeted, hunted, and murdered, right? And so there's a lot that comes with that, right? In terms of like coming out, right? And, you know, facing violence, facing criticism, facing, you know, homelessness, and facing loss of community too, right? And so it definitely plays a role. And I think that another thing that I think comes up with our LGBTQ community is that we do know that, you know, within BIPOC communities, there are faith communities, especially within the Black community, where the church has been so ingrained in our lives, especially in civil rights. But with our LGBT community, they may have experienced some religious-based trauma that we do not take into account. Right.
Absolutely.
They may have been told that they can pray the gay away or been exposed to like different types of conversion therapy and violence. And if we really don't have that lens in our healing, right? You know, the westernized way of healing can be dangerous to those individuals, right? And so, yeah, like definitely those intersections we do have to address in the therapy space.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, when we discuss all of this, there's really no happy medium of just being.
Mm-hmm.
It's either one or the other. There's no gray area. And it's like you're either, like you said, you're either ostracized or you're either holding to this kind of box of what either your own wants you
Mm-hmm.
to be or what society wants you to be. There's just no, you know, for example, with Black men, you are either toxic or
Mm-hmm.
you're too soft, but there's no medium. And I believe within that, that's where you lose the emotional intelligence because you don't have the opportunity to actually, kind of honestly I guess, display your emotions without being judged in a certain way. If you're angry, you're an angry Black man. If you are sensitive, then, you get stereotyped as gay. Same with Black women, you're the angry Black woman. If you're assertive, you're honest, you're angry and rightfully so, or you're just there. So it's like you're pigeonholed into a box of what you're supposed to be. In addition, you kind of carry the whole culture with you. So you carry your ancestors, but you're also kind of being there and modeling for the generations ahead.
Yeah.
You will be an ancestor. So yeah, I'm glad you discussed that, because it does. I think that's very important. In terms of decolonizing therapy, what does that mean? Can you explain to our listeners? And why is it an essential part of creating equitable mental health space?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have to realize that, as therapists, we can talk about the love of therapy all day and how helpful it is, but the therapy space was not created with Black folks in mind, and so many populations, not just Black folks, BIPOC folks, women, right? We were these modalities and these theoretical frameworks were suited more for rich white men, older white men, right? And so that excludes so many people, right? And I think that, that was kind of the frustration when I came into the field, is the things that I was seeing in the books and the theory that we were learned didn't broadly, reach all the populations that I was working with, right? I worked in community behavioral health, right? And which means we were seeing a lot of Medicaid, right? And a lot of these modalities didn't work for these populations because we weren't addressing the fact that okay, it's cute that you can do whatever acronym modality, right? But I'm not really focused on that because, I'm dealing with domestic violence at home, right? I'm hungry, right? I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight, right? And I think that a lot of traditional westernized techniques really put it on, it's a failure of either the therapist or the client. Right. As opposed to maybe it's just not the right modality and we're focusing on the wrong things, right? I think with decolonizing mental health, you do have to recognize systems of oppression are harmful. And those are the things that impact our clients and also impact us largely, right? And so in decolonizing, I think it's more about one, critiquing these models, right? And then also using more eclectic approaches that really honor the ways that our ancestors healed, right? Before colonization, right? Before colonialism, right? Because we know that when our ancestors were kidnapped and brought over here, we know with indigenous communities, right, before colonialism, right, they had practices for healing spiritually, mentally, physically, right? It was very much whole person centered, right? But what colonialism did was shame us from reaching for those things that we found to be healing, right? Shamed us for our spirituality and demonized those things, right? And what we know is that disconnect from our ancestral practices and from our culture, it is a trauma in and of itself, right? And when we get people back to practicing, spirituality and healing, right? The ways that our ancestors did, right? It's a return. And I think that it does have more of a benefit, right? For communities of color, right? Specifically when we talk about decolonizing practices and we talk about a hot topic now is birthing practices, right? And how, we used to have midwives, indigenous midwives, like, Afro-Indigenous midwives, right? Who were delivering babies and had different tinctures and practices that healed the whole family, right? Until that was demonized by the insurance companies because they could see that it made money, right? And so we moved away from those practices. But now Black and Indigenous women and our babies are dying, right? Because we're farther outside of those practices, right? So it didn't benefit us. It doesn't even benefit white women, right? Because like our maternal mortality in the US is abysmal, right? And so, I think that decolonizing practice, I think I see it as like a stripping away, but also a return back to what we were meant to do and how we were meant to heal.
I definitely agree. I do see, a rise of doulas now, which is paid for by a lot of insurance. So I think that is somewhat helpful. I see some people going back that way to, our original birthing practices and such. And I do think this movement of decolonizing therapy is really big. I would like to, I know among my peers, at least my African American, Hispanic, BIPOC, LGBTQ, I do see them moving towards that. I would like to see more of our non-melanated or males going towards that way too of decolonizing therapy, but also understanding the person as a whole, which includes understanding sexuality, gender, religion, race, ethnicity, all of that, and the trauma that comes with it and the history that comes with it.
Yeah.
Because I think when you're looking at trauma and stuff, the first thing I ask women, at least when I hear about, they're telling me they work too much, they're tired, they have a lot of stress. The first thing I ask them is, how are you raised? What did you learn? What messages did you receive? And then it goes all the way back. And it's like, okay, now we found the root of where this is coming from.
Yeah.
Now you can start shedding what you know, and then you can kind of rebirth or become what you are.
Yeah.
The real you. So I know those are lessons that can be learned in the decolonization of therapy, and not only just therapy, but also medical too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of medical trauma, especially among women, but also like, if you look at the Tuskegee experiment, so among Black people as well, or even if you go further, the Jewish during the Holocaust were experimented on. And if you look even further back, you look at what the Japanese did to Koreans. So I think with each culture, we can learn a lot about the trauma and the messages they've received.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, in speaking back to that like generational trauma and that epigenetics, right? Like we have to recognize, I think too, that, Black folks were brutalized during slavery, right? And, they are trying to erase that history now, right? But, when Black folks were kidnapped and brought to the Americas, there were rumors about white people eating Black folks. Spoiler alert, that was not 100% untrue, right? But we were experimented on, right? Gynecology was built off the backs of Black enslaved women, right? And also like, Puerto Rican women and, people that, were, brutalized during forced sterilization. Of course, like folks with disabilities also experience that too. But we were brutalized and experimented on, and we have all of these perceptions now around Black people not experiencing pain the same ways as white folks, right? And I think it's not just physical pain. It's also that we project that too in terms of like Black women and Black people don't experience emotional pain, right? Which is why in workplaces, Black women are given very little support and given, unrealistic expectations. And the belief is like, she's strong, she'll figure it out, right? And
Yeah.
so we also have to realize like how that is rooted in the everyday lives of the clients that we are seeing now. And using a decolonized approach really honors like that history, but it honors too, like, what is happening today? How can we do some like removing, and how can we also work on our own reframing about things? Because we do have a lot of Black women who are out here believing that they are strong, right? That, they can take on everything, right? They are, superhuman. And that is not the case, right? We are humans and we do need support. We do need help, right? And it's also about getting, folks the right kind of help too. They don't need somebody to, reinforce like, oh yeah, you are strong, right? That's not the messaging for Black women, right? The messaging might be, okay, sis, it's okay that you don't have things figured out, that, so, I definitely see that all as a part of like decolonizing our practice.
Absolutely. So I so enjoyed this conversation. Can you tell our listeners how we can get in touch with you, where your websites or contact information?
Yeah. So with my practice, Therapy Love, on Insta, I am therapy_LUV, and you can follow me there. And of course, like therapylove.com for my website. With my nonprofit, Girlfriend Culture, which in Girlfriend Culture, we focus on creating rest and retreat spaces for Black women. And so we host like quarterly retreats. We're moving into like some monthly stuff coming up, which is great, that center around creating a safe space for Black women to rest together in community. And so on Insta, we are GF Culture. And our website is girlfriendculture.com. Please follow us, donate, of course, because we definitely want to have the funding and investment to really center the healing of Black women, because it's more than just like rest, right? Like rest brings so much, into our physical and mental health. So that is how you can reach me.
Absolutely. And to our readers and to our listeners and our followers, we will include Lindsay's information on our website and our transcripts so you can follow her or access her resources. And in closing reflection, we want to leave you with this thoughts. You are living proof that your ancestors' dreams were valid, powerful, and worthy. How will you honor them today? And remember, as we work through this journey together, we are planting seeds for those who come after us. Let's root ourselves in hope, healing, and a vision for a brighter future. Thank you for joining us on Rooted in Our Ancestors' Dreams. If this episode resonated with you, or you'd like to get in touch with our guests, please share it with someone who might need it. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and follow us. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube under Rooted in Our Ancestors' Dreams. Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, stay rooted, stay inspired, and keep dreaming. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for joining us and being our guest.
Thank you.
Thank you.